Welcome back to Yang Daily. I'll be your host, Alex Cheney, bringing you all the Yang news you need to live your life right. Got a bit carried away digging into an example of corporate lobbying today with a couple minor addendums. Big UBI news in the next episode. Let's get to it. Quick shout out to our Tier 3 patrons, Shay Meehan and Nathan Stankowski, as well as all our other patrons. You keep us all informed and engaged. If any of you out there want to join these advocates of humanity first and independent journalism, head on over to patreon.com/YangDaily. It would only take a couple of bucks a month from each listener to keep this podcast and community going and growing into the future. Now on to the news. For starters, did anyone spot the 710,000 lightning strikes that hit Canada in just 15 hours yesterday? Holy mother! To be fair, only about 200,000 of them actually reached the ground. Only 200,000. And they were spawned by heat and smoke from fires, which then caused the lightning strikes, which then caused more fires. Everything's fine. Not going to spend too much time on this next item, but sad to say it may be relevant to the fate of democracy and much else. A Manhattan DA has indicted Trump Co. and its chief financial officer with 15 felony counts, including fraud, conspiracy, grand larceny, and falsifying business records. Basically, the bulk of the charge is tax evasion via giving gifts to the higher-ups in the company. It could result in prison time for the CFO, but not definitely. The CFO is pleading innocent. The biggest consequence may come from the fact that the indictment could legally brand the company with cooking the books, which activates a clause in loan contracts allowing them to be canceled. Trump's organization operates very heavily on debt. If a significant portion of their lenders called in that debt, it could potentially sink the whole ship. The investigation will continue, and this is likely intended to pressure the CFO into turning on Trump himself. More details in the thread below. Did you like Manchin's leaked call with big donors revealing how he cripples federal legislation for money? Well, Greenpeace has provided more frank insight into the corrupt relations between our politicians and corporations in this kleptocracy that we call a democracy. The UK's Unearthed platform posed as headhunters looking to hire McCoy, a Washington, D.C. lobbyist, for ExxonMobil. In the video given to Channel 4 News, McCoy states that Exxon has secretly fought against legislative action on climate change using third-party organizations and lobbied key senators to remove and diminish climate change measures, including from Biden's infrastructure package. Quote, "Did we aggressively fight against some of the science? Yes. Did we join some of these shadow groups to work against some of the early efforts? Yes. But there's nothing illegal about that. We were looking out for our investments. We were looking out for our shareholders." End quote. Cue the comic of the post-climate change apocalyptic future in which a father tells his kids of the before times when he and his company created great value for shareholders. It's in the links. McCoy goes on, quote, "When you have an opportunity to talk to a member of Congress, I liken it to fishing, right? You know, you have bait, you throw the bait out, and they say, oh, you want to talk about infrastructure? Yeah. And then you start to reel them in. You want to be able to go to the chief and say, we need Congressman so-and-so to introduce this bill. We need him to make a floor statement. We need him to send a letter. You name it, we've asked for everything." End quote. In other words, make Congress your buddy. Because why represent the people when you can represent the big corporations who will bribe you? McCoy names 11 senators who he says are crucial to ExxonMobil. Guess who's first up? Senators Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, of course, followed by Capito, Tester, Hassan, Barrasso, Cornyn, Daines, Coons, Kelly, and Rubio. All but Hassan and Kelly received money from Exxon. McCoy described Manchin as the kingmaker in the Senate and says he spoke to his office on a weekly basis. Weekly. McCoy also describes how they use third-party stand-ins to be their, quote, whipping boy, end quote, at congressional hearings. Then he described how they lobby to bring the size of the spending packages down because that makes it easier to cut green energy measures. Quote, "Instead of a $2 trillion bill, it's an $800 billion bill. If you lower that threshold, you stick to highways and bridges, then a lot of the negative stuff starts to come out. Why would you put in something on emissions reductions in a highway bill?" So people say, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. So then you get to the germane of saying, that shouldn't be in this bill. End quote. GOP certainly helping out with that. Next, McCoy basically admits that Exxon only publicly supports a carbon tax because they believe there's no chance of it happening. Quote, I will tell you there is not an appetite for a carbon tax. It's a non-starter. Nobody is going to propose a tax on all Americans. And the cynical side of me says, yeah, we kind of know that, but it gives us a talking point. We can say, what is ExxonMobil for? We're for a carbon tax. End quote. Shocking, I know. He seems to ignore here that many carbon tax proposals include a dividend that returns the tax proceeds back to the people. Granted, it is clear Exxon would have no qualms about secretly lobbying against those bills while publicly supporting them. Finally, Exxon's response to this video sums up the all-encompassing excuse for actively encouraging the devastation of our species. Quote, we have a responsibility to our customers, employees, communities, and shareholders. Our lobbying efforts fully comply with all laws. End quote. What matters the decimation of humanity as long as we make a few people rich? While capitalism seems to function better than socialism or communism historically, this is the toxic side of capitalism, disregarding long-term consequences for short-term gain, undermining the perspective needed for innovation, sacrificing everything of real value in exchange for money, and subverting the government away from the people to serve corporations instead. This is why some intervention in markets is necessary. Without it, capitalism destroys itself. And this is one reason democracy must be protected to prevent kleptocracy. To end with something that's not about corruption, there's a new petition out from Income Movement for making the expanded child tax credit permanent. Take a minute to add your name at the link below because this near UBI for kids is super important. And that'll do it for today's Yang Daily. Bookmark and share the Exxon lobbying tape and the CTC petition. Flood Congress with calls, tweets, faxes, and letters using the Resist bot or Income Movement easy contacts below. If you need help, consult Humanity Forward, the Income Movement Aid Database, the Mission Asset Fund, or United Way, and don't forget to Yang Daily.